I'm now joined by four of our other keynote speakers from today: Scott Strazik at GE Gas Power, Frédéric Godamel at Schneider Electric, Marcus Romero at Fortum, and Peter Parry at Bain & Co. Thank you all for joining us for this Q&A. Lots to get through, so let's jump straight into it. Scott, we've heard a lot today around what's being done and the challenges and opportunities. Are we moving fast enough to achieve this energy transition?
We definitely have an opportunity, Owen, to move faster, both in utilizing the technology that exists today to decarbonize this decade, while also investing in technologies that'll get us to zero carbon in the last mile in the decades to come. And the challenge here is we're going to have to do both simultaneously based on the size of the challenge, but with the technology that exists, the art of the possible is great.
Marcus, anything you would add there? Enough being done, what are the challenges?
I think the technology is certainly there. So we know that technologically and from the availability of capital point of view, we can tackle the climate change challenge. I believe firmly in that. The question is how do we bring predictability and bankability into the equation? So steady policy, steady regulation, decisiveness from governments. In our case, largely from the EU on what should the market design be. This is, I think, which would help. Technology is there, capital is there.
There's questions coming up, I'm sure, around technology and around government. Before we get to those, Frédéric, is enough being done? Are we moving fast enough?
The answer is the curve of CO2 emission, right? Cannot predict what it will be in 2021, but for sure we need to accelerate. As it admitted by Marcus and Scott, technology is there, the funds are there, the funding are there much more towards sustainable future. So I think we have all what we need to accelerate. We need a regulatory framework that favors this acceleration.
Sure. And Peter, to close on the same question to get us started, is enough being done for this energy transition?
Well, I think the simple answer is no. I mean, there's clearly more that needs to be done and more quickly. How it gets done and how capital gets behind getting it done, I think, is the key. We can all see the opportunity, as mentioned by the other panelists. We can see where the technology lies and maybe even where some of the solutions are. But it's getting that capital behind it swiftly rather than in 10 years' time, in 2-3 years' time.
Okay, interesting. Another theme that's come up repeatedly, and Marcus and Scott, this is likely one for you, but we see gas being talked about as a kind of key component, a transition fuel, as many do say. So, Scott, let's come to you first. What role does gas play in the energy transition?
Gas is going to play a critical role, Owen. I mean, that doesn't mean that clearly the world is one in which renewables is going to grow faster than any other power source. And we want renewables to grow as fast as the world can afford, but renewables alone won't be enough. And gas is going to play a critical role this decade to be a force multiplier for that renewables growth, supporting it. It'll also play a critical role with coal to gas switching in many places of the world to provide that load following power. What I'd also say is gas isn't just going to be a transition fuel. It's ultimately going to be a destination fuel on the pathway to zero in the decades that follow, whether that be with hydrogen in pre-combustion technology or carbon capture, because without it, when we think about the 2050 objectives that we all have, it's going to be hard to get there without gas playing both an accelerator today and a destination tomorrow on the pathway to zero. And at GE, that's what we're very focused on every day, both in parallel.
Yeah, no, interesting. Marcus, I know Fortum and also Uniper, your subsidiary, are doing interesting work, particularly in the hydrogen space. So gas in general, but also with regard to hydrogen, to follow on from Scott's point, what role do you see there?
Gas is huge. If I put a European perspective on this, Europe is using 3,000 terawatt hours of electricity that needs to be made clean. We're on a good way on that. We have CO2-free power, we have hydro, we have nuclear, but there's still a lot of fossil that needs to be replaced with clean electricity. Well, that will come largely from renewables, and that will create a flexibility and storage problem. On the other hand, Europe is consuming even more gas, and that's all fossil. 5,000 terawatt hours of gas that needs to be made clean. and hydrogen will play a role in this. But solving the intermittency of renewables and cleaning the gas will create a huge need for flexibility and storage, and also the conversion of clean electricity into clean hydrogen, clean methane, methanol, ammonia. So gas will be a massive business. And one important thing is that because of this, if we now put gas in a severely disadvantageous position from a taxonomy point of view, that will reduce the predictability, the bankability that I spoke about actually in your first question.
Okay, interesting. The other point, and we were talking about this just moments before we came online, but is that technology question. And we heard earlier on in some opening panels that role that technology has, and as a couple of you have already commented, the technologies that we already do have. But Frederic, perhaps we'll come to you first from a Schneider perspective. How do we scale that technology? How do we really roll it out?
Look, you have two angles of view. One angle of view, which is looking at the CO2 emission and try to take them by the order of priority and look how technology can help you to abate what is today the most important source of CO2 emission, right? And each corporation can do that. Each municipality can do that. I mean, this can be done at every level. And that's the first thing to do is basically assess where you have an impact on the environment and work on that. And you will find that in most of the case, you have an affordable solution that allow you to do much better than what you were running in the last 10 years. That's what we did at Schneider Electric. We did it in our own processes. We started to do it with our supplier, and then we did it with our customers, and some are around this call. And we help our customers to basically go along this journey of assessing where they are and finding the right technological solution. All this have a significant return on investment. I can mention new buildings. I can mention the move to electric mobility. All this has now a significant return on investment and a flexible use that is compatible with the challenges we have on intermittent generation and the usage of energy.
No, interesting. And I do have another question here for you, Frederic, around that investment piece, but let's come back to that and allow perhaps Peter, is there anything you'd add to this technology conversation?
Yeah, I think the technology question is a very, very thorny one, in as much we've seen massive technology improvements in the last 5 or 7 years in some of the new energy technologies. And we anticipate that experience curve, as we call it, to continue to be pretty steep. And so for investors looking at this space for those companies operating assets, there is a question of timing. Do I invest in the version of technology we have right now? Or is it going to be so much better in 2 or 3 years' time? Am I going to be spending all my time repowering my wind farms? Am I going to be spending my time replacing my solar panels for a better version of what we have today? So on the one hand, yes, we've got to lean in and start to use the technology that is available to us and drive the costs down. But on the other hand, we've got to keep investing in improving that technology and its efficiency, because that's really where the breakthroughs continue to come. I think we've been surprised at the steepness of those experience curves, and we want them to continue to be pretty sharp.
Owen, I can give a practical example of how fast the scaling up can be. We entered the Indian solar market, what is it now, six years ago, and since that we have grown by 100-fold in our solar activities, and as we all know, the cost of technology has fallen to about 20% of what it was back in 2014-15. Oh. So I believe that the scalability is definitely there, but the question is that how do you mobilize the capital? And then I come back to the bankability and predictability. So if we have a fast developing technology, of course it could make sense to wait for a year, unless someone says that I'll give you visibility on your investment return. Doesn't have to be high, but the bankability and visibility and certainty on that contracts are holding, that is important.
Sure. And Scott, anything to add on the technology conversation that we've got into here?
I think that the team, Marcus, Frederic, Peter, all hit on key points. I mean, as we play all this out, there's going to be an evolution between R&D markets that turn into demonstration markets, and ultimately having the right system in place to incentivize it becoming scalable over time. And that is where I think the governments are going to play a critical role in all three of those markets. A lot of the technologies there, it's about how we scale them, and not just for this decade, but for future decades. There's different technologies and different chapters of that evolution.
Okay. To switch tact just a little, there's been a running theme today around collaboration, working together, and that achieving essentially this energy transition won't be possible unless we pull together. So, Peter, how can we get companies who have for so long been in competition to really start collaborating and working more closely together?
Yeah, it's interesting. Competition and collaboration sometimes go hand in hand, don't they? I mean, and the industries in which we're talking about, largely power and energy related activities, have a long tradition of working together, particularly on very large scale infrastructure projects, very large scale production assets. But as we dive into this new space, there is a lot of competition emerging. I think that competition comes up really in a couple of different places. One, it's competition between companies who want to occupy the same space, but it's also competition for capital with investors and with the banks that need to support these projects. So I think the industries we're speaking about can do a good job in collaborating with each other, on the one hand to try and drive projects forward, but on the other hand, shifting to a much more collaborative relationship with their investors, a much more collaborative relationship with their financial institutions that support them. We've seen a lot of, if I can put it this way, adversarial dialogue between investors and companies in the last couple of months that's exacerbating some of the issues that we're trying to deal with. So I think collaboration has to become the key, but with collaboration comes a whole new level of transparency. Are we prepared to share information? Are we prepared to share expectations on financial outcomes? Are we prepared to take on risks together? And unless we do those things, that collaboration will stutter rather than shift to the industrial scale that we need it at.
Sure. Frederic, anything you would add on that point around collaboration, around working together? I know you drew some examples previously.
Yeah, I just would like to build on what was just said. I believe in the previous world of conventional generation, transmission, distribution, and usage of energy, collaboration was not necessary, right? It becomes completely necessary today because production is much more intermittent with renewable. Usage will be much more having peaks and valley, right? So means the usage will become much less stable than what it was, and the grid will become a key element of exchanging information. So if some would say I'm going to drive the energy transition without collaborating, I think it would fail. I think it's required to collaborate because there will be a need to balance production, demand, and grid. And doing that requires collaboration, requires exchange of data, requires openness from the entire profession. And I believe in all the exchange we have, that's a discussion we see really now very strong in the mind of all the leaders. I don't see barriers there. So I think it's moving. Everybody has understood that we are in an open ecosystem.
Sure. You mentioned policymakers there, so perhaps a nice kind of follow up to that. Scott, how do we kind of further this collaboration with not just the private sector, but also with governments and the public sector as well?
Yeah, I mean, Owen, where I would also start is we have to remember this system that we rely upon to live our lives and have the lights on every day has been built over 100 years. And we're basically saying we need to transform it in the next half decade to decade while growing the demand for electricity and decarbonizing simultaneously. So a little bit first going back to the prior narrative on collaboration, competition, there's a lot of opportunity for us based on the size of the problem, and it's the big us. That said, governments are going to have to play a critical role. This, just like they did building that infrastructure over the last 100 years, they're going to play a hugely important role in the next 5, 10, 15 years to either drive a lot of talk, but actual paralysis with activity, or a lot of meaningful progress. And that's going to come down to the incentive structures and the bankability and the stability of a system we can all believe in, much in the way that Marcus framed up the taxonomy dynamic with gas in Europe, but with many other emerging technologies that have a pathway, but they need a pathway with capital markets being able to believe in them, as Peter was framing up. And it's doable, but governments are going to play a key role here.
Yeah, if I could just jump back on that point, Scott, with the capital markets do need support. I mean, they need the evidence that they can then lean into and support. And so that's going to be a really important trigger. That next 3 to 5 year window is, there's a lot of capital potentially available in this space if the economics start to look much better and if the economics start to show the right kind of direction. So I'm a little bit cautious about the role that the regulator or government has to play in subsidizing these sectors to the point that they become, uninvestable. There is a happy medium to be struck here between where support is required and where the capital markets can operate as efficiently as they can do, and then we can really see this thing move forward much faster.
I think Scott raised a great point about the half a decade to decade. So comparing to a system that's built over many decades, we're trying to change things very quickly. And on the point, Peter, you are making, actually, I don't think we need a lot of support because technologies already have scaled up in many places to very competitive levels, even on merchant basis. But the question is that, do we have stable and predictable regulation? Do we have a market design which we can anticipate so we know how to invest in flexibility, how to invest in intermittent production, and how to invest in gas conversion, and have some certainty that the rules are not going to be, in light of tens of gigawatts of coal, lignite, nuclear being phased out very quickly. You need to, as an investor now into, say, gas peakers, you need to get some certainty that what are the rules going to look like in 10 years' time. We may not need a financial support, but some kind of guarantee of a framework that's at least in place for some time. But I would say that yes, in order to get as quickly as we want through this massive transition, we do need very collaborative ecosystems and networks where I cannot work alone and Scott cannot work alone. Actually, we are working together, GE and Fortum Group through Uniper on really solving the issues that how are we going to make our gas-fired fleet work with new types of gases. And it's no small undertaking, from pipes and valves and turbine blades and ignition and storage and production, everything needs to be figured out and very quickly. But I'm positive that we can get there. And I go back to my earlier example of how fast, once we got through the tipping point, how fast, for example, solar has scaled up and is now at grid parity in many places.
Yeah, and just to very quickly on that point of regulatory stability versus subsidy, is the kind of get that balance right. I think that's the kicker that really propels things forward. If there's an assumption that it requires subsidies forever, then the capital markets would sort of sit back and wait for that to pass through.
Absolutely, and I go back to my example from India. So we're actually we are providing long-term electricity at lower cost than what industry, consumers, or agriculture are paying today. And for us, the thing there is the predictability, not the price. The price level is lower than what we could get from the market.
Yeah,
agreed.
Great.
Agreed.
A great example, Marcus.
Brilliant example and a brilliant way to end as well. Unfortunately, we are at time, but a brilliant discussion. Thank you again to Scott, to Marcus, Frederic, and Peter. Also to all of our event partners, including GE Gas Power, Schneider Electric, Uniper, Fortum, and Bain & Co. It's been a brilliant day today. Do continue to network through the networking portal and through the discussion groups. Sign up to the roundtables. The next one is coming up very shortly. And do check out the free content in the Exhibitor Hub. Tomorrow, we'll be exploring the impact of this transition on societies, cities, mobility, and the workforce. So join us again tomorrow, 11 a.m. UK time. The first event workshop, as I say, is due to start in just a few minutes' time. So I will see you there. Thank you, everyone, and see you again tomorrow.
Thanks, Owen.